The moment we'll open that door, everything inside him collapsed like a fragile structure that had been waiting too long under pressure. There was no sound, no air, only the cruel stillness of disbelief. The sight before him, Electra lying beside Liam, did not seem real. It was as if the world had suddenly shifted its axis, as if every certainty he had ever held had been replaced by a deep, hollow echo that vibrated through his bones. For a long second, he simply stared, frozen between shock and numbness, watching the outlines of two people who had rewritten the definition of betrayal right in front of his eyes. The woman he had loved, trusted, and defended more than anyone else, the one he thought he knew, was now the stranger lying in another man's arms. And that man was Liam, someone who had once been close enough to call family. When Electra realized Will was standing there, her body stiffened, her breath caught in her throat. She sat up in panic, her hands trembling as she tried to pull the blanket around herself, her voice breaking with incoherent explanations. She insisted that Liam had entered the wrong room, that he was drunk beyond reason, that she had been too shocked and frightened to react. But her words sounded distant, detached, as though they belonged to another story. Will couldn't hear them clearly. He couldn't even think. All he could see was the unmistakable intimacy in the room, the disheveled sheets, the faint smell of alcohol and perfume mixed together, the unbearable silence that screamed louder than any confession could. The party that had seemed so celebratory only hours ago now became the graveyard of his illusions. The laughter, the champagne, the smiles, all of it was an elaborate stage for a tragedy he hadn't known he was the lead actor in. Electra's presence at his side all evening had been, he thought, a sign of loyalty, of affection. She had smiled, touched his arm lightly, whispered that she loved him. Yet now, under the cold light of betrayal, those gestures felt staged, calculated, meaningless. He wanted to scream, to shatter something, to erase what he saw. But he couldn't move. He was trapped in that moment, a witness to his own undoing. Electra's attempts to explain sounded almost cruel in their futility. She pleaded that she had been dizzy from the alcohol, that Liam had stumbled in, mistaking her room for his, that she had been half asleep, paralyzed with confusion. But Will saw through the fractures in her words, the pauses too long, the tone too desperate, the lack of outrage. If it were true, if she had been truly horrified, why hadn't she run? Why hadn't she screamed? Why had she simply lain there, silent, until he opened the door? Those questions burned inside him like acid, each one deepening the wound she had carved into him. He saw in her eyes not just fear, but guilt, the silent admission that, in some small, twisted way, she hadn't stopped it because part of her didn't want to. As the news spread through the house, the air thickened with disbelief and discomfort. Guests whispered, eyes darted toward the hallway. Then came Bill, his face stormy, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. He took one look at the scene and his fury erupted like a long-contained fire. The Spencer name, the empire he had built with pride and control, now stained by scandal within his own family. To him, this wasn't only a personal humiliation, it was an assault on his authority, his legacy, and his son's dignity. He glared at Electra with the kind of disgust that could silence anyone. "You used him," he said, his tone low but trembling with rage. "You used my son to climb into this family." Bill's anger did not stop there. When he turned to Liam, the fury transformed into something colder, disappointment that went beyond words. Liam had been reckless before, yes, but this? Sleeping with his son's girlfriend, even if by drunken mistake, was unforgivable. Bill saw in that act not only a moral failure, but a reflection of weakness, the same pattern that had ruined Liam's life before. In that instant, Bill made a decision that would change everything. He severed Liam from Spencer Publications, announced it right there in front of everyone, his voice like thunder rolling through the room. "You're done," he said. "No more excuses. No more chances. You're out." Liam tried to protest. He said it wasn't what it looked like, that he hadn't meant for any of it to happen. He explained that the alcohol had blurred his memory, that he'd thought it was his room, that everything was an accident. But Bill had heard enough excuses from Liam in his lifetime to recognize another one when he saw it. The man's patience was gone. His pride, already wounded, could not tolerate another betrayal. And this wasn't just business, it was blood, family, reputation. Bill's eyes burned with fury as he told Liam to pack his things, to stay away from Will, from the company, from everyone associated with Spencer. "You've disgraced us all," he said, his voice trembling with restrained violence. For Will, the confrontation felt surreal. He stood motionless as his father's words echoed in the room, watching the entire scene unfold as if he were an observer to his own life. His mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, humiliation, rage, heartbreak, and disbelief. He wanted to defend himself, to lash out at Liam, to confront Electra, but the words wouldn't come. He felt hollowed out, like something inside him had died. The girl he had loved was now a stranger. The brotherly figure he had admired had become a rival in the most unthinkable way. And his father's wrath, though justified, only deepened the chaos inside him. When Liam left that night, silence followed him like a curse. The door closed behind him, and Will's world closed too. Electra tried to reach out, sobbing, begging him to believe her. She swore that she would never intentionally hurt him, that she loved him, that she had been overwhelmed by fear and confusion. But Will couldn't listen anymore. Every word sounded like poison. He saw her lips move, but all he could hear was the echo of betrayal. The trust that once defined their love was gone, shattered into pieces that would never fit together again. The days that followed were a blur for Will. He shut himself off from everyone, refusing to speak to Electra, ignoring Liam's attempts to reach out. The humiliation haunted him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image, Electra's hair tangled on the pillow, Liam's arm draped across her, the shock on their faces when they realized he was there. The image became a recurring nightmare, feeding on his insecurities, amplifying his pain. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. His once bright energy was replaced by a dull, aching exhaustion. Katie tried to comfort him, but her words fell flat. She blamed herself for organizing the reunion party that led to this chaos. Bill, meanwhile, grew even more protective of his son, channeling his anger into decisive control. He met with the legal team the next morning and ordered them to terminate every contract tied to Liam's name. Bill Spencer was not just a father in pain, he was a businessman seeking retribution. He made sure that Liam's influence in Spencer Publications was erased completely, his name scrubbed from every future deal. The message was clear: betrayal had a price, and it would be paid in full. For Electra, the aftermath was unbearable. She spent nights crying, her thoughts spiraling between guilt and desperation. She replayed that night over and over, wishing she could undo it. She knew Will might never forgive her. The shame burned through her every time she imagined the look in his eyes, that mixture of disbelief and heartbreak. She tried to write to him, to explain again that it had been an accident, that Liam had been too drunk to know what he was doing, that she had frozen in fear. But the truth she avoided admitting, even to herself, was that a part of her had allowed it, a split second of surrender she could neither justify nor forget. Bill's fury didn't end with Liam's firing. He made it clear to everyone that Electra was no longer welcome anywhere near his family. In private, he told Katie that he wouldn't let Will destroy himself over a woman like that. He saw Electra as a manipulator, someone who had climbed her way into Will's life with calculated sweetness and hidden ambition. She wanted to be a Spencer, he said bitterly, and now she's learned what it costs. But even as Bill raged, Katie saw something else: fear. Fear that Will would never recover from this, that the betrayal would harden him beyond repair, turning him into a mirror of his father's coldness. Meanwhile, Liam's world was collapsing. Overnight, he went from being a trusted member of the Spencer empire to an outcast. His phone stopped ringing. Colleagues avoided his calls. The tabloids, ever hungry for scandal, caught wind of the story. Spencer family scandal. Son fired after bedroom betrayal. His reputation crumbled under the weight of public shame. He tried to explain himself to the press, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the more he spoke, the guiltier he sounded. Desperate, he reached out to the one person he thought might still listen, Hope. Hope had every reason to hang up when she heard his voice. This was the same man who had betrayed her years ago, who had promised change, but always found his way back to the same destructive patterns. Yet, as he spoke, broken, remorseful, terrified, something in her softened. Liam wasn't lying when he said he had nothing left. His voice carried a rawness she hadn't heard before. He admitted his mistakes, said he didn't expect forgiveness, only understanding. Hope listened in silence, torn between anger and compassion. She knew that helping him could reopen old wounds, that it could make her look foolish again. But she also knew that despite everything, a part of her still cared. As Hope grappled with her decision, Will spiraled deeper into isolation. His friends reached out, but he withdrew further. The betrayal had not only broken his heart, it had shattered his faith in people. He questioned everything, his judgment, his instincts, his worth. He began to see betrayal everywhere, even in kindness. He refused to return to work at Spencer, claiming he needed time, but the truth was he couldn't face the world yet. Bill grew worried, though he hid it behind anger. He saw the same hollow look in Will's eyes that he once carried himself after losing love, and it frightened him. Electra tried to reach Will one last time. She went to his apartment, left a note by the door, confessing her guilt in detail, not to absolve herself, but because she couldn't live with silence anymore. She wrote that she understood why he hated her, that she didn't deserve forgiveness, but she wanted him to know the truth, that what happened with Liam wasn't born of desire, but of weakness and confusion. She ended the letter with a single line: "I hope one day you find peace, even if it's without me." Weeks turned into months. Liam's career remained in ruins, and Hope's compassion for him grew into cautious support. She didn't love him anymore, that much she knew, but she couldn't ignore the part of her heart that still believed people could change. Yet helping him came at a cost. Old memories resurfaced, and she began to question whether forgiveness always meant healing. Will, meanwhile, began to write again, not love letters, but reflections, fragments of his pain turned into poetry. Through words, he tried to understand the labyrinth of emotions inside him: anger, longing, pity, nostalgia. He realized that love, once broken, doesn't vanish. It lingers like a ghost, haunting the spaces where trust once lived. Bill eventually reached out to Will, urging him to return to work, to move forward. But Will refused. He wasn't ready to bury what had happened, nor did he want to pretend everything was fine. For the first time in his life, he stood apart from his father's shadow, not as the obedient son, but as a man learning to navigate pain on his own terms. Bill saw the strength in that defiance, even if it frustrated him. He realized that Will's heartbreak might shape him into something deeper, wiser, someone capable of compassion in a world that had too little of it. In the end, each of them was left changed. Electra, consumed by regret, left town quietly, disappearing from the public eye. Liam, stripped of everything, found humility for the first time in years, rebuilding himself slowly with Hope's guarded support. Bill, despite his anger, softened enough to see the humanity in his sons, the brokenness that made them real. And Will, though scarred, began to heal. He learned that love could destroy, yes, but it could also teach. That betrayal could break you, but it could also strip away illusions, forcing you to see who you really are beneath them. The night that was meant to be a celebration became the night that tore everything apart. Katie had organized the reunion with the hope that it would heal old wounds, bring laughter back into a house that had long forgotten joy, and perhaps remind her and Bill that even after years of separation and heartbreak, they still shared something worth salvaging: a family. She had spent weeks arranging every detail, choosing the music that once played at their happiest moments, selecting the flowers Bill loved, preparing the champagne that had marked their milestones. In her mind, This night would be their chance to start over. But when everything collapsed, when Will screamed, when Electra stood in shame, and when Liam's face fell into guilt, Katie's dream disintegrated. What she had created with love turned into the stage for a humiliation so deep that its echoes filled every corner of her life long after the guests had left. Bill's rage was immediate and merciless. In the chaos that followed Will's discovery, he didn't hold back. He lashed out at Liam, at Electra, and then, in his most unguarded moment, at Katie. The accusation came out sharp, as if he had been waiting years to say it. You brought them all together for this? You dragged everyone into this damned party, and now our son is broken because of you. His words struck her like physical blows. She stood frozen, her mind spinning in disbelief. She had wanted to make things better. How could it have gone so wrong? In the days that followed, Katie's sense of guilt deepened into something darker. She replayed every decision, every conversation, every invitation she had sent. She remembered how she had convinced Bill that the reunion would be harmless, even healing. It's time we remind everyone who we are, she had said, trying to sound confident. She believed that laughter and love could patch over years of tension and rivalry, that one evening could erase the silence that had grown between them. But instead, her optimism became the match that lit the fire. Will's heartbreak, Bill's fury, the public humiliation, all of it, she believed, had started with her good intentions. Bill didn't mean to destroy her, but his anger left scars she couldn't hide. Every argument ended the same way, his voice rising, her silence deepening. He blamed her not only for the party, but for believing that reconciliation was even possible. You always think you can fix everything, he said one night, but all you ever do is make the cracks deeper.
Katie didn't fight back.
She didn't defend herself, because, in her heart, she believed he was right. Sleep eluded her. The house, once filled with voices and light, became an echo chamber of her thoughts. At night she would wander from room to room, unable to bear the quiet, unable to rest. Every corner reminded her of what she had broken. Will's room was empty now. He had gone to stay with a friend, unable to face either of his parents. Bill slept in the guest suite, a wall of silence between them. And Katie, alone, found herself whispering apologies to no one, as if saying them enough could turn back time. The guilt was not just emotional, it became physical. Her body felt heavier each day, her heart slower, her breath shorter. The simplest tasks became mountains she couldn't climb. She skipped meals, stopped answering calls, and let her responsibilities fade into the background. Brooke called her one morning, worried after hearing that Katie hadn't shown up at work. Katie tried to sound fine, tried to lie, "I'm just tired," but her voice broke halfway through the sentence. Brooke arrived within an hour, finding her sister sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by wilted flowers from the reunion. The sight tore Brooke's heart in two. Katie's depression was not new. It had been a shadow that followed her for years. After every betrayal, every heartbreak, she had always managed to find her way back into the light. But this time felt different. This time, she wasn't the victim of someone else's choices. She was the cause. In her mind, she had orchestrated the night that destroyed her family. The thought consumed her until she could barely breathe. Brooke tried to remind her that she couldn't have known what would happen, that no one could predict betrayal. But Katie's mind had already turned against her. "It was my idea," she whispered. "It all started with me." Bill, for his part, was unraveling in his own way. Beneath the anger that had fueled his outbursts lay fear. Fear that Will's trust in him was gone, that his family's name was now synonymous with scandal, and that Katie, the woman who had once anchored his chaos, was slipping away. He watched her withdraw, first emotionally, then physically, and he didn't know how to stop it. His pride kept him from reaching out, and his guilt stopped him from apologizing. But at night, when the house was quiet, he would pass her door and pause, listening to the stillness, wondering if she was awake, wondering if she was crying. Days turned into weeks. Katie began avoiding the world. She refused to go to the office, didn't answer Brooke's messages, and ignored Bill's attempts to talk. When he did find her, sitting on the edge of the bed staring out the window, she barely reacted. Her eyes looked distant, like she was already somewhere else. "I just wanted us to be happy again," she murmured once, her voice thin as paper. Bill didn't know how to respond. He wanted to tell her that it wasn't her fault, that the world had twisted itself beyond their control. But every time he tried, pride got in the way. The tension between them grew until it filled every room. Bill, accustomed to fighting with the world, didn't know how to fight for someone who had given up. His anger, once directed outward, turned inward, into shame. He had accused her of ruining everything, but what kind of man blames the woman who is only trying to bring her family together? He wanted to take the words back, but he couldn't. The damage was done. Katie had retreated too far. Will, meanwhile, had become a ghost in their lives. He rarely called, and when he did, his voice was clipped, detached. He said he was fine, but Katie knew he wasn't. She sensed the pain behind his words, the betrayal that had reshaped him. He was her son, her beautiful, sensitive boy who had inherited her heart and Bill's stubbornness, and now he was lost to her. Every missed call, every unanswered message deepened the ache inside her. She began to believe that she had failed him as a mother. Brooke grew increasingly alarmed. She knew the signs, the late-night silences, the long hours of staring into space, the refusal to eat. It was the same darkness that had claimed Katie once before. She begged Bill to do something, to talk to her, to help her. But Bill was paralyzed. He couldn't reconcile the image of the strong, capable woman he had loved with the fragile shell now wandering through their home. When he did try to reach her, she recoiled, unable to face his anger or his pity. "You were right," she told him once. "I ruin everything I touch." That sentence haunted him. It stripped him of every defense, every excuse. For the first time, he realized how cruel his words had been, not just in the heat of that night, but throughout their history. He had loved Katie fiercely, but he had also wounded her repeatedly, sometimes without meaning to. He had built his empire on control, on dominance, on the idea that strength came from never admitting weakness. But now, watching the woman he loved disappear into silence, he understood that real strength was something else entirely. Katie's depression deepened. Days blurred together, and the outside world became something distant and irrelevant. She stopped looking in mirrors, unable to face her own reflection. Sometimes she sat for hours in the dark, holding her wedding ring, tracing its shape with trembling fingers. Other times she would replay old videos on her phone, clips of Will's childhood, family trips, moments when laughter had been easy and love had felt simple. The contrast between then and now felt unbearable. One evening, Brooke found her sitting by the pool, staring at the water. The air was cold, and she hadn't even brought a sweater. Brooke knelt beside her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders.
Katie didn't move.
Her voice was soft, almost detached. "Do you ever feel like your whole life has been one long mistake?" Brooke felt tears rising but forced herself to stay calm. "You made one bad decision, Katie," she said gently. "It doesn't erase all the good you've done." But Katie shook her head. "It's not just one decision. It's every time I thought I could fix something that was already broken. I never learn." Meanwhile, Bill was wrestling with his own demons. He threw himself into work, trying to drown out his guilt in business meetings and late-night calls. But every success felt hollow. Every time he walked into the house and saw Katie's empty eyes, he felt the weight of what he'd done. He started drinking again, not heavily at first, just enough to dull the edges. But the numbness became addictive. He told himself he was coping, but deep down he knew he was avoiding. The fracture in their marriage widened. They stopped eating dinner together. They stopped sleeping in the same bed. Conversations turned into brief exchanges about logistics, bills, schedules, nothing personal. And yet, beneath the silence, there was still something unspoken: love. It hadn't vanished, only buried itself under layers of hurt. Brooke eventually convinced Bill to seek help. She reminded him that Katie had been through this before, that she needed professional care, not distance. At first, he resisted pride, stubbornness, the illusion that he could handle it himself. But one night, he came home to find her sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television that wasn't even turned on. That was the moment he broke. He called her doctor the next morning. The therapy sessions began quietly, hesitantly. Katie didn't speak much at first, but as the weeks passed, she started to open up. She admitted that she felt responsible for everything, for the party, for Will's pain, for Bill's anger. Her therapist helped her untangle those thoughts, to see that guilt and accountability were not the same thing. It was a slow, painful process, but for the first time in months, she began to feel like she could breathe again. Bill, too, started changing. He stopped blaming. He started listening. He realized that what Katie needed was not his dominance or his solutions, but his empathy. He began to show up, quietly, consistently, sitting beside her during therapy, walking with her in the mornings, making her coffee even when she didn't drink it. It wasn't grand gestures that mattered now, but small acts of presence. Gradually, the tension between them softened. There were still hard days, days when Katie couldn't get out of bed, when Will's absence felt unbearable, when the weight of what had happened still loomed large. But there were also better days, mornings when she laughed at something Brooke said, afternoons when she joined Bill for lunch at the office, evenings when they sat together in silence, comfortable for the first time in a long while. Will eventually returned, cautiously, testing the fragile peace that had settled in their home. He saw the change in his parents, the humility in Bill's eyes, the quiet strength returning to Katie's voice, and he felt something he hadn't felt in months: hope. He still carried scars from what had happened, but he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, healing was possible. Katie would never forget the guilt of that night, but over time she learned to live with it. She came to understand that her mistake had not been in wanting to bring her family together, but in believing that happiness could be orchestrated like an event. She realized that love isn't built through perfection, it's built through the willingness to stay, even when everything falls apart. And as she stood once more on the same terrace where her party had begun, looking out at the horizon, she felt the faint stirrings of peace. She still missed the version of herself who had believed that one evening could fix everything. But she no longer hated the woman she had become, fragile, flawed, but honest. And when Bill stepped beside her, his hand brushing hers, she didn't pull away. For the first time in a long time, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of forgiveness. The reunion that had destroyed them would always remain a scar, but it also became their turning point. Out of guilt came truth. Out of pain came tenderness. Katie had fallen into darkness again, but this time, she wasn't alone. And as the sun set over the Spencer estate, casting its golden light over the pool where she had once wept, she finally allowed herself to believe that even the deepest wounds can heal, not by forgetting, but by forgiving.